Day 1. Our first night on Hill Street did not offer any peace, and the constant ticking of the clock was audible from every room in the house. And to be quite honest with you, we don't even own a clock. Day 2. Georgia, 5 years old, and our youngest, smiled and handed me a piece of paper. I drew a picture, Daddy, she offered with an impish grin, and I took it from her to inspect it. The page was blank. Georgia, this page is blank, I explained softly. Her face grew red immediately and she stamped her feet. It's not blank, Daddy. It's a picture of our family. Put it on the fridge. Georgia almost never yells, so this concerned me greatly. But that paled in comparison to what I felt when I looked down at her and saw that she had no eyes. I should say rather that the whites of her eyes were in place, but nothing more. Her pupils and irises were gone. Georgia did not seem to notice they were gone at all. She just grew louder and continued to yell. I slammed the paper onto the surface of the refrigerator and shakily affixed a magnet to it. When I looked back at my daughter, her eyes had returned and she was smiling now. Thank you, Daddy, she chirped before skipping down the hall. Day 3. I had gotten out of the bed in the middle of the night for a glass of water. I can't explain it perfectly, but humans do certain amount of echolocation at their disposal. Something about the way our house sounded was off. I stepped into the darkened living room with the hopes of alleviating my fear, but the discomfort only grew. I fumbled for the light switch and flicked it on immediately. The entire room was upside down. All of the furniture was affixed to the ceiling as though it were the most natural state in the world. Lights illuminated the scene before me by shining upward from the ground. After staring for several seconds, I decided that the best approach was to turn the lights back off. This way, at least, I wouldn't have to see it. The rest of the house was, or at least felt, right side up. The living room appears normal in the daylight. Day 4. The insects are bad this year, and every garden on the block has wilted except for ours. Day 5. A box arrived in the mail today, and it had my name on it, written in a child's handwriting. There was no return address. Day 6. The refrigerator is now completely covered with drawings that Georgia has given me. Every single one of them is blank. Day 7. I get up before the rest of the family every day to inspect the house. While looking around, I found there to be footprints outside the door. As the prints got closer to the house, they became gradually elongated. The last two prints in front of my door were the width of my torso and as long as I am tall. Day 7. I'm typing this on my laptop in bed and my wife has been calling me softly and patiently. I looked at my bedroom door and there she was. Georgia was just standing there looking at me and not saying a thing. I was about to get out of bed, but then she started talking. It didn't look like Georgia anymore, and her voice was just so much different. Then what happened next honestly still scares me till this very day. Georgia started smiling and walking towards me, and after just a bit she started running, and that's when I leapt out of my bed and honestly ran out of the house. Looking back, I shouldn't have done that since my wife was still in the house and it was my daughter. After going outside, I came to my senses and went for my wife and daughter right away. I got them both out of there, and we haven't experienced anything paranormal since then. I'm a first-year resident at the local hospital, so I often work long hours and I'm always sleep deprived. I do make decent money, if not nearly as much as a licensed doctor, but on account of student loans, I live in a crappy apartment. The bedroom of this apartment is tiny, and the only spot for my dresser is immediately to the right of the entrance. It's just a bit too long for the space, so the door only opens halfway before it starts pressing against the corner of the dresser. This happened often enough my first month here that I've already left some big dimples in the wood. The bathroom is down the hall on the left and the living room to the right. The hallway is just wide enough for the bedroom door with a couple of inches leeway on either side for the frame. Why is this important, you ask? About 2 weeks ago, the door to my bedroom moved, and I'm not sure how else to describe it. I had just worked my second 30-hour shift in 3 days, and on 4 hours of sleep, I was getting up for another one. When I pulled open the bedroom door, something struck me as off, and it took me a minute to realize what it was. The door had opened completely. I looked to see what had happened, and I discovered that while my dresser was still flush against both walls, there was an extra inch of space between the dresser and the door. I shrugged, chalked it up to be some fluke of the apartment walls, and proceeded down the hall to shower before heading into work again. When I got home 30 hours later, exhausted and desperate for sleep, the door was pushing against the dresser once again. Nothing unusual happened for a couple of days, but on Thursday morning I was going out for another long shift when the door opened even wider. It looked like the doorway had shifted even further, so that I could see half an inch of the hallway wall sticking out beyond the door frame. I stared at the sliver of drywall for a few minutes, dumbfounded, while my mind tried to come up with some explanations. The building was old, and this was just a result of natural wall tensions easing, is what I tried to believe. With work coming up in half an hour, I really just wanted to get some coffee and get the hell out of here. So I decided to call the super after I got off. However, when I got home the next morning, the door was back to normal and I was tired enough to not even care. On Saturday, I was headed to the hospital again when I found that although my door only opened halfway, grinding against the dresser as usual, the hallway itself had shifted a good foot. The entire wall and then some was clearly visible. To the left of the wall, where I should have been looking into my bathroom, there was this black inch-wide gap. The light from my room only went a couple of inches into that shadowy space, but I could see a floor that looked to be made of concrete, smooth, featureless, and gray. This musty smell emanated from inside, like from an old dry basement or maybe an attic that had been left untouched for too long. My first instinct was to just close the door, as this must have been a hallucination brought on by working too many hours with too little sleep. But the doorknob clattered against solid drywall and my door wouldn't close. Confused and more than a little disturbed, I initially thought to just leave and get the hell out of here and worry about the details later. The need for a rational explanation, however, coupled with a morbid sense of curiosity, kept me from bolting out of the front door. I called out of work for the first time in almost a year, saying that a pipe had burst in my apartment and that I needed to let the repairman in to fix it. Next, I called the super and asked him to come by. Then, while waiting for him to arrive, I shined a flashlight into that sliver of space. The super arrived less than an hour later, but in the time it took for me to answer the door and escort him back to my room, everything had gone back to normal. As you can imagine, I got pretty agitated, even frantic. However, when the super saw how upset I was, he actually asked me outright whether or not the walls seemed to be moving on their own. While I gaped at him, he explained that the previous tenant, a young woman who had also worked at the hospital, had complained to him about something similar. She had claimed that the wall sometimes extended an inch or more past the frame of the doorway, but whenever he came to investigate, nothing was out of the ordinary. The young woman eventually became hysterical and on the verge of moving out, but just some days later she was never found again. Around a few hours later, I woke up in midnight. I'd been dreaming about something, and I don't remember what it was, but it must have been a nightmare because I woke up with this sense of utter dread washing over me. It was like when you're alone in the early hours of the morning, silence hanging over your room like a sheet, and out of nowhere you get that feeling that someone is in the room with you, standing behind you, watching you. That was the feeling I had upon waking up in the stillness of my bedroom at midnight. And just then I started hearing scratching noises. It was faint at first, so faint that I thought I was imagining it. but gradually grew in volume until it was clearly audible from across the room. Something was scratching at my bedroom door. That in itself shouldn't have been so alarming. I had mouse troubles at the apartment before, and I'd even hear them scratching at the walls at odd hours of the night. After the events of the previous days, however, the sound jolted me awake, and that sense of dread deepening into real fear. After a bit of time, the scratching ended up stopping, and I started hearing footsteps. I got out of my bed and went onto both of my knees and started praying to God that nothing happened to me. Then the sound stopped and it was dead silent in the house. I was too scared to walk out of my bedroom, so I went into bed and cried myself to sleep. It's been over a week and I haven't gone back. And to be honest, I don't ever want to go back.